This is part 10 of the Craftsman King Seeley 100 Drill Press Rebuild Series. If you haven't seen part 9, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be finishing the assembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. So the first thing we're going to be doing is lubing up the table. So there are these two bores here and then the lock bores. Then we're going to go ahead and just apply a little bit of lube to the table support. And then we'll go ahead and install the table. So that last bore is actually catching on the protractor. And if I turn it upside down, it clears it no problem. So line it back up and then we can install the lock pin. And then we can lube up and then install the table lock. And once we've got that lock in there, we can just tighten it down. And then we can install the Jacob's chuck key. And next we have the head casting, and we've got to lube up all of the bores in it. And there are a lot. So some of them are kind of hard to get to. And then we are going to install the outer snap ring. If you recall from the disassembly, there was originally a spiral retaining ring in here, but I'm installing the correct one. And this is what the spindle pulley assembly rests on inside the head casting. I've got a whole video explaining how all that works, and I'll put a link to it here. Next, I'm just going to temporarily install a column collar. And I've measured the height of the head casting so that when I slide it on here, it'll just rest on top of that column collar. And that way I have two hands to work with to be able to install the head lock. And once it's seated, we can go ahead and center it. And then we'll lube up the head lock. So that's the lock screw and handle. And then we've got the sleeve and then the lock nut itself. And these have flats on them, and those flats need to face towards the column. Once we've got everything in there, we can lock it down. And then we can go ahead and remove that column collar because that was just temporarily there. Next, we're going to install the power panel. This is the power panel that I fabricated. And it'll just drop in there. I'll go ahead and route the switch. And try to line all that stuff up inside the head casting. The center part of the head casting where this is sitting is just a big void. There's nothing there. And that's why it's got plenty of room to work. And then we'll install the switch itself. And it has an on-off indicator and then a little nut to hold it in place. And then we'll tighten it down with the 2 screws. Then we'll install the light bulb. I like using LED bulbs, as bright as I can get them. Next, we're going to install the spindle pulley assembly, and you just need to get that bottom bearing square with the bore, and then you can tap it with the mallet and it'll seat. And then you've got a second bearing that you need to get seated in that top bore. That's my dog barking outside. And then we'll verify that it's fully seated. It should be about 3/4 of an inch down from where I laid that top roller. And if all that's good, then we can go ahead and install the 2 machine screws that go in from the sides. And again, all that's covered in that video that I linked earlier. But they hold the spindle pulley assembly inside the head casting. There's 1 on each side. And next, I'm going to go ahead and install the quill lock. But I'm not going to tighten it down. I'm going to leave it in there real loose because we don't have the quill in there yet. And you could do this after the quill is installed. I just chose to do it at this point. Again, these locks have flats on them and they need to engage the quill. And then we have the hub pinion spring assembly. And after we've lubed it up, we're going to go ahead and install it. And it is a real tight fit. This is the tightest pinion I've ever had in a drill press, but it moves freely. I may just have too much grease on there or something. And next we'll install the quill spindle assembly. So we just start it inside the bore. And once we get it lined up, we can go straight up with it. And then once the spindle engages the splines of the spindle pulley assembly, everything should line up. And then we'll go ahead and adjust the pinion hub spring assembly so that I've got one of those feed handles at a 90-degree angle. Make sure everything's flowing nice and smooth. Then we can put the lock screw in for the pinion. And this has a fiber washer on it that gives it the proper gap. But it's got a dog point on the end of this screw and it rides in a channel on the pinion. So you've got to pull out on the pinion a little bit, kind of wiggle it back and forth until you know you're in that groove. And then we can tighten it down. And then we'll make sure that it's not too tight and everything's running good. Next, we're just going to go ahead and install the lock screw for the tension knob. And we're not going to screw it in too deep. We're just putting it in there to hold in place for right now. Next, we have the feed stop rod. And at this point, we need to go ahead and adjust the feed stop bracket and tighten it down so that the feed stop rod rides between those little protrusions on the side of the head casting, and it's not rubbing on any one of them. There's about a 32nd of an inch between the feed stop rod and the head casting on both sides of it. You can fit a piece of paper in between there to get that proper gap if you need to, but I just usually eyeball it. Once we've got all that lined up, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch wrench to hold the feed stop rod so it doesn't turn. And then we'll tighten down the nut on the bottom of it. And then check it one more time, make sure it's not rubbing. We're good to hook. Next, we'll go ahead and install the feed stop collars. And this is a 3-piece system. It has 2 of these collars, and between the 2 of them, there's a little fiber or felt piece that goes between them. I'll zoom in here so you can kind of see it. There's the felt. And you can see how one side of these collars is got an angle on it, and you want those 2 angles to engage that felt. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the feed tension knob and then tension the feed return spring. So once we've got it in there, there's 2 prongs on it that engage the dog leg on the feed return spring. And as we turn it away from us, counterclockwise, it will cause the quill to rise. And then we can tighten it down once we've got it where we want it and check for that return. And that's about how we want it, kind of a snappy return. Next, we can install the quill lock handle. So I'm just using it here to tighten down the quill lock. And then once it's in that tightened position where I've got it right now, then we'll go ahead and install the set screw that holds it in place. And that way, when it's unlocked, it'll rest on top of the feed tension knob. So that's locked and that's unlocked. Good to go. Next, we're just going to go ahead and install the 2 lock screws for the motor mount rods. We're just getting them started. And then we can install the motor mount and motor. So those 2 rods go in the openings on the back. And we'll go ahead and push it in a good ways. And then we need to tighten those lock screws down because the motor can fall out if we don't. And we'll be making several adjustments to this. Next, we're going to go ahead and plug the motor into the power panel. So I'm just routing that cable around the column and into the head. And then I plug it into the power panel that I fabricated. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the V-belt. I like using a cogged V-belt. So this is a 1/2 inch by 45 inch V-belt. It's a Duralast belt. You can get these from AutoZone or Advanced Auto Parts. I don't remember which one. One of them carries Duralast. And then we'll loosen back up these 2 lock screws and let the motor mount ride forward. So now we need to properly tension the belt. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to pull out on the motor mount, pulling it away from the head. And that applies the tension to the belt. And then we lock those 2 lock screws down. So it doesn't have to be super tight. I'm talking about the belt here. The belt doesn't have to be super tight. Just as long as it's not going to slip, we're good. And as long as that belt is on there, the motor will not fall out. So the next thing we need to do is level the rear pulley or the motor pulley. And so we can raise it and lower it on the shaft and then tighten it down with the set screws that are in it. Once we've got that done, we need to just make that final adjustment to that screw that I added to the bottom of the motor mount. And it doesn't look it here, but what I'm doing is getting the mount bracket parallel with the back of the head casting. And once that's done, we are done. We'll test run the drill press and everything is running like it should be. And that is the 100 series rebuild. So we went from this. It did not look very good at all. Really dirty, really rusty. Some messed up parts on it. A really messed up table. And we replaced a couple of these parts, but all of them could have been cleaned up and reused. And I'll end up reusing most of them on other drill presses, most likely. And this is the finished drill press. So I replaced the table, the hub, the feed handle rods and knobs, the feed stop collars, the motor pulley, the feed stop bracket. I replaced the Quill lock handle and then added new power cords. I installed new bearings and a new belt and added the engine turned headband. But everything else is original and has just been cleaned up and repainted and polished. So this is definitely a keeper drill press for me. This was a fun project to work on. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So, what's next? This is the next project. I've got a couple of column collars there that I need to clean up and repaint. But these boxes contain something that I've been wanting for several years now, and my buddy Frank Lee located one for me, so I went ahead and purchased it. And that is a head and table lift that I will be rebuilding, and that's the next project. And that'll wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. And until then, I will see you next time.